A couple months ago, I set out to create the perfect Passover dessert, and it's this chocolate coconut macaroon cake inspired by the traditional Passover dessert. It happens to be gluten-free and dairy-free and totally delicious. So this version of the cake has no flour, but it uses ground almonds and coconut in place. So here I have 1 cup of raw almonds, and I'm going to toast these in a 350 oven until golden brown and fragrant. While those are toasting, I'll prepare my baking pan. This cake is dairy-free, so it's totally kosher for Passover, and I'm using coconut oil instead of butter. The goal is just to get a thin coating here. So in goes this parchment round, and what I like to do here is use my fingertips and palm to press out all the air. Another thin layer of coconut oil over the parchment. And just to ensure no sticking, I'll dust the bottom and sides of the pan with a bit of cocoa. Okay, so I have the bottom and sides coated. I just took my almonds out of the oven. I will let these cool. And in the meantime, I have 8 ounces of dark chocolate here, 1 cup, also virgin coconut oil. Mix these together. Okay, I'll bring this over to my stove. Here I have a saucepan with about 1 inch of water, and it's just barely simmering. And I have a heat-proof bowl here. This goes on top, and the water isn't touching the bottom of the bowl. The idea here is that the steam is creating a gentle heat that melts the chocolate. The chocolate is almost all the way melted. At this stage, I can take it off the double boiler because the heat in the mixture will finish melting the chocolate. Back over to my station, and I want this mixture to cool before I make my cake. Again, I don't have flour. I'm using ground almonds, so I need to grind these in a food processor. This is a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder and a teaspoon of salt. And now I want to add a 1/2 cup of finely shredded coconut. Okay, now it's time to start building my cake. This style of cake is called an egg foam cake. I'm not starting by creaming the butter and sugar together. I'm starting with eggs. So 6 whole eggs go into the mixer. This recipe does not have any chemical leavener, so that means like baking soda or baking powder. The way that this cake gets its lift is by working air into the whole eggs. So I beat the eggs on medium speed until no longer streaky, and it only takes about 20 seconds. Now I'm ready to work in my sugar. I have a 1/2 cup of white sugar, and a 1/2 cup of light brown sugar, and 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Now back on medium-high speed until the eggs are very light and thick. Okay, so at this phase, it's pale and light. It's sort of moussey, but it doesn't have that sort of really thick volume. So with this going on low, I don't want to deflate the eggs too much. I stream in my cooled chocolate mixture. So now we have something resembling chocolate cake batter, and in go my dry ingredients. I'll just fold these in on low, gradually adding. Now I don't want to overmix here because, again, I don't want to lose too much of the air in those eggs. So I think what I'll do last is fold a couple times by hand just to make sure all the dry ingredients are incorporated. Okay, now into my pan. Okay, every last bit into the cake pan. You can see it's fairly full. This cake doesn't rise a lot. As I said before, it's a slightly denser, chewier cake. This goes into our 325 oven, and when it's done, I'll insert a cake tester into the center, and it will come out greasy looking, so a little bit wet, but clean with no crumbs. And that'll take about 35 to 45 minutes. And I'm going to put together sort of an icing, what I'm calling a ganache, except it's not a true ganache because I'm using coconut milk instead of heavy cream. So I have 4 ounces of chopped chocolate, along with a tablespoon of agave, and a little bit of kosher salt. Okay, so this is a 1/2 cup of coconut milk, and I want to heat this up just until it's simmering. The idea is that the heat from the coconut milk will melt the chocolate. So this comes up to a simmer pretty fast because of all the fat that's in here. Bring it back over to the chocolate and just pour it straight over. And this, I really just want to let it rest for a few minutes until the heat from the coconut milk can melt all the chocolate. This is the cake. It's been out of the oven and it's mostly cooled. I'm ready to unmold it. You can also see that the cake sunk ever so slightly in the center. That's normal. You find that a lot with cakes that are, an egg foam cake. And I can unmold it directly onto this cake stand. Okay, this goes into my stand mixer with the paddle. And the idea here is that I want to beat this to work a little bit of air into it until the mixture is basically cooled. The tricky part here is that it starts to set up really, really fast once it cools. So I'm looking for the part where it's just spreadable and I'm going to immediately ice my cake. And the entire thing goes over the cake. Now I like to use a little baby offset spatula, going all the way to the edge but not quite over the edge. And it looks pretty loose here, but you'll find after just a few minutes it's totally set up. All right, so I don't want to fuss with it too much. I think we're looking really good. And now I'm ready for the final step, which is to create some decorative crunchy toppings out of almonds and flaked coconut. So I have 1 tablespoon of sliced almonds. These are blanched. If you can find the ones with the skins on them, that looks pretty too. And then I have this large flaked coconut, unsweetened, 2 tablespoons. And I'm just tossing it with a teaspoon of agave. You could use maple or honeyworks, any other liquid sweetener, and a teaspoon of granulated sugar. Just toss this together so that everything's well coated. All right, all of this is combined and just onto a parchment-lined baking sheet. This goes into a 350 oven until the almonds and coconut are toasted and golden and the sugars are caramelized. Okay, these toasted for about 4 minutes. You can see there's nice caramelization, they're nice and shiny, and I want to let these cool and then I'll break up into smaller pieces. Okay, now onto our cake. There's no real art to this, just kind of letting them fall where they want to. You can see from the inside of the cake that it's very fudgy, very moist, sort of like a brownie. But when you eat it, you get all the texture from the coconut and the almonds. It's a really, really good chocolate cake. I promise you will not miss the butter or the flour, and it's so good, I'm gonna make it all year round, not just at Passover.